Hi, everybody. It's Daniel here. Thank you so much for letting me do this via recording. Really sorry that I couldn't be there in person today. Hope you guys have a great day and that the CCBL goes well. And yeah, thanks again for being flexible. I really appreciate it. So, I'm going to be talking about estrogen, menopause, and migraines. I think this will be really relevant to the CCBL and also in our block as well. Hopefully, this will help with exam questions and just as future doctors. So I think this is also not just relevant, but also really interesting. I found that super interesting, so I hope you guys do as well. So I've written down the session learning objectives just to make sure we're all on the same page. So I'm going to be talking about estrogen, menstrual cycles, and especially menopause, how it relates to migraines. And I'll be talking about familial estrogen levels. I didn't find a ton there, but I can talk a little bit about it. I did find some stuff on breast cancer and estrogen. And lastly, I'll bring up one of the more interesting familial causes of migraines. Okay, so getting into it, women and migraines. So women are 3 to 4 times more likely to have migraines than males. And not only are they more likely to have migraines, but they're more likely to have severe migraines. And severe migraines are classified by being associated with nausea, vomiting, and light sensitivity, photosensitivity. So women are more likely to have migraines, and the migraines they have are more likely to be severe than males. So pretty interesting there. Kind of a double whammy. Women, more than any other demographic, are at a higher risk for migraines. So across all the different races and across all the socioeconomic statuses, it's the women that are more at risk. So it's true that at lower socioeconomic status does tend to have more migraines than a higher socioeconomic status, but still in both of those higher and lower socioeconomic statuses, it's still the women that are more likely to be having these migraines. Really unfortunate. So some numbers, interesting one here. 70% of all those who suffer from migraines are women, and almost 20% of all women in the United States will at some point suffer from migraines. So what's the connection between women and migraines? Well, the answer is estrogen. So there's a couple of, first let me start with this graph. I think we covered this in foundations, but if you're like me, it is helpful to have a refresher. So estrogen is here in yellow. It kind of peaks around ovulation, and then there's a dip, and it decreases at the end of the menstrual cycle. And as I'm going to try to hit home for my message today, it's not necessarily that estrogen is low that's causing migraines, it's that estrogen is changing. So there is a peak and a drop. And that peak and drop is what causes, they think, is what causes these migraines. So I'll try to talk more about that. But yeah, women most often report migraines during their child rearing years. So it's when there's this peak and drop, that men do not experience. And then pregnancy decreases the risk of migraines, and that's because estrogen is constantly increasing. So during pregnancy, you get this off the charts continuation of estrogen just continuing. So because it's kind of constant and there's not that drop, then pregnant women who had migraines before pregnancy, once they get pregnant, they do not report migraines as often. Although they say migraines may return after birth, but that's kind of a misnomer, right? Like, is it because there is a drop in estrogen after childbirth, like a big drop, but there's also sleep deprivation and poor eating and just anxiety. So they're kind of like they can't pin it down that that's exactly the hormones that's causing that, but I'm sure that it is related. Now there are some that think, okay, well if we know that estrogen, if it's that peak and drop that's causing migraines, why don't we prescribe an estrogen pill that keeps estrogen at a constant level? And there are some contraceptives that do that. It's kind of their goal, right? But interestingly, women who have had migraines and that take these kind of hormones as therapy have mixed results. Some say, oh yeah, that definitely helped. That definitely helped my migraines. And others say, no, it made it worse. So just kind of interesting. Definitely a field for further research. And then one last point to kind of nail down that estrogen is affecting these migraines is that before adolescence, before puberty, migraines are actually more common in males than females. And then typically migraines decrease after menopause, which is when estrogen, instead of peaking and dropping, it kind of levels out. Um, and I did underline and italicize typically because there are women who go through menopause and say that no, the migraines are still there. So it's definitely not true for everybody. But it's just another point that estrogen is a factor in these migraines, that this peaking and dropping is definitely related to migraines. So I want to talk just a little bit about menopause because I think it's relevant to this case that we're on. So just an introduction, I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about this in repro, but it's a natural process. Um, the average age is 51 years old, and basically the ovaries shrink in size. They stop releasing an egg every month, and or every other month, I guess, if you have two ovaries. And they also cease to produce hormones, which estrogen, right? So if you've experienced menopause, you're postmenopausal, then you have low estrogen, right? So that's kind of what our patient seems to be going through right now, is that she has had migraines in the past, and now her hormones are dropping, and she is having low estrogen. So yeah, just again to tie home, it's really that change in estrogen level that's more likely to be the cause of migraines rather than just low levels of estrogen in general. So I included this here, some of these low estrogen symptoms, just because our patient has talked about them. So some non-migraine symptoms. So she had an absent period. She's talked about hot flashes. She's talked about night sweats. She's talked about weight gain. And her family has said that she has had mood changes, although she hasn't specifically said that. So yeah, there's definitely a tie-in, I think, with our CCBL and some low estrogen here. And then breast cancer, just a quick add-in for breast cancer. So some types of breast cancer actually recognize estrogen as a growth hormone, which is super interesting. So if there's lots of estrogen floating around, then it can actually cause those neoplasms to replicate more quickly, to grow more rapidly. And since a history of migraines is associated with low estrogen, then actually a history of migraines is a decreased risk for breast cancer, which is kind of interesting. I know that was a question we talked about, and that is the answer. So causes of low estrogen, I don't want to go through all of these, but this picture here is actually really good. I especially like here it gives the levels of estrogen. So you can see pregnancy, it's like off the charts, right? It just continues to grow or to get higher and higher. And then when you have during childbirth, it drops. So there's lots of, so I mean, there's definitely some truth to that. That dropping of estrogen could be related to migraines after pregnancy. And postmenopausal, there's a big change too. So you can imagine if you're a female adult in your reproductive years, every month you're having this peak and drop, and then once you enter menopause, all of a sudden you're just dropping and dropping and dropping, and that's a big change in estrogen, and that change can cause those migraines to be even more severe than they typically would be with a normal cycle. So I think that kind of seems like what our patient is going through right now. She had those migraines during the normal peaks and drops of her cycles, and now that she's continuing to drop even lower during menopause, she's getting some more of those severe migraines, which is really unfortunate. There is some familial causes of low estrogen, and again, it was kind of difficult to pin down the specifics of them, but basically, in general terms, you could have ovaries that are not producing enough estrogen, or you could actually have estrogen receptors throughout your body that are not recognizing the estrogen. So your ovaries could be producing the normal amount, but you're not able to recognize it. So those are some familial causes of estrogen. I don't want to go through this, but I just wasn't sure if anyone was going to like specifically list all the causes of migraines. So it's definitely true that 70% of women have migraines, and that most women have those migraines during their reproductive years. So there's definitely a tie-in to hormones. But that's obviously not the only reason why we have migraines. There's lots of other reasons. And caffeine, Rohit's going to talk about that. I think that'll be pretty interesting. Also, just like super quick tangent, weather changes was like, I was like, what? That's super interesting. Apparently, like the pressure, the barometric pressure that like we can't perceive, apparently it affects our brain in some way, and it can actually cause a migraine to come on, which is just pretty crazy. So. Okay, and then the last thing I want to finish up with is familial. So there's actually quite a few familial. There's like many other, I wrote that on the bottom, many other genes are associated with migraines. But the one that I really wanted to talk about was familial hemiplegic migraine. And I want to talk about this because I think it ties into neuro pretty well, like to our tests and stuff. Um, it's pretty rare, but it can also happen like sporadically, spontaneously, I mean. It's like you don't technically have to have it run in your family, it can just happen. And basically, it's a severe migraine, severe nausea, severe vomiting, severe light sensitivity. But this is the super interesting thing: temporary weakness and numbness on one side of the body, speech disturbances, and confusion. So it sounds just like a stroke. I remember Dr. Louis was telling us that one of the mimics of a stroke can be a migraine. So I think that's something to look out for as future doctors, and also maybe on the test. I'm not sure. A few of my references, Dr. Frank, I wasn't sure exactly what we needed to talk about with the references, but I just wanted to say review articles were good. Mayo Clinic was like really good intro. And then when I wanted to make sure that the information I was getting was like completely reliable, I'd go to like, NCBI, some of these like, more authoritative articles that I made sure that what I was presenting was like factual. But Mayo Clinic really was like a great website just to kind of understand more of the genome information. So that's my presentation. Thank you guys again so much for letting me do it online, and hope you guys have a great day. And thanks again. Bye.